Good morning, podcast and YouTube listeners. This is Donato Cardenas, Danielle's husband and technician for WZHP Radio Innsmouth. Due to circumstances beyond our control, some of last night's broadcast recording was corrupted. The show we will be able to provide for you this week will be somewhat abridged. We apologize for this and we'll do the best we can to ensure we do not have these issues in future broadcasts. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. Emmett Thompson disappeared in broad daylight. No one knows how it happened. Kidnappings don't usually occur during the city's rush hour, and much less when the victim is intimately familiar with their hometown. Emmett had nothing and no one to run away from. He had made valuable friends and powerful connections. His career was beginning to blossom. He was a soon-to-be father and had already set up a little girl's room in his home. Which is why Emmett's family and close friends were dumbfounded when he didn't return home from his expedition. He'd left his house at 10 in the morning, carrying a satchel packed with everything he took on his trips. His journal, a canteen, a flashlight, extra batteries, a spare cell phone, a multi-tool, rope, a bit of food, extra clothes, a compass, and his trusted Ruger. Most importantly, Emmett took his camera. He was an aspiring cinematographer who filmed the hidden world of Mother Nature, a show he was planning on pitching to Discovery Channel. He filmed his treks through some of the world's most biologically diverse ecosystems and documented the journey of it all. He'd been to Antarctica, Alaska, the Amazon rainforest, the Daintree, and explored both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, to name a few. He wasn't a rookie, not in the least. Emmett's latest film had taken him to the Sahara Desert, where he studied what little life the scorching barren land held. He'd said his goodbyes to the people close to him, and after a few months, he'd gotten the footage he needed to make yet another film. After the good news that Emmett's trip had gone well and he was returning home with what he called the most boring yet most interesting film, his fiancée planned a small celebration as a warm welcome back. I was invited, but not for the reason you'd think. I'm a private investigator, and I was contacted because Emmett did not return home the day he said he would. His friends and family arrived at his suburban home in time for the celebration to begin, but were left with balloons in their hands and confetti poppers still in wraps. A welcome home banner hung tauntingly above the front door, the empty driveway, a permanent reminder of the vacancy. Police were contacted as well. Emmett's family were extremely anxious and frightened that something terribly wrong had happened to him, so they wasted no time in putting all of their resources to use. They'd called my cell phone at around 11 p.m. on Saturday, 8 hours after Emmett said he'd be home, to request my services. I left immediately after they informed me the police were also on their way. I needed the evidence first. I've handled cheating spouses, shady business deals, located stolen merchandise, investigated crime scenes, hacked, bugged computers, followed people, but nothing compares to a missing persons case. There's something about the doubt and misery that tears a family apart, not knowing where their loved one is. That compels me to do everything in my power to find them. A missing persons case is also bittersweet, if you can call it that. There are the instances where you locate their whereabouts and are the sole reason the person was found. It brings a sense of relief and happiness, not only to the family, but to you. Knowing that you did the impossible and answered the right questions is more than fulfilling. It's indescribable. Then, there are the cases where you don't find them. The realization that someone has simply vanished from the face of the earth with no traces, no evidence left behind, makes you feel weak. The knowledge that you simply weren't good enough to find them crashes around you like the biggest, heaviest wave, and it destroys you, just as it does the family. I've devoted my life to avoid that outcome. But some cases just have no explanation. They turn cold from the beginning and remain that way no matter how long you search. Questions lead to more questions. Uncertainties lead to doubts, and the answers, well, they're nowhere to be found. Gone. Just like the very person you're looking for. This was the case with Emmett Thompson. Every piece of evidence I collected added to the pile of unanswered questions and led me deeper into a hole of quandaries, confusion. The pieces fit awkwardly at best, and even then they were jumbled and made little sense. The family were no help, huddled together in the living room with pictures of Emmett strewn over the coffee table. They gave me access to the master bedroom upstairs with heartbroken expressions, puffy eyes, and crumpled tissues in their hands. The bedroom was ornately decorated, with beige and brown being the color scheme and deer heads complementing the accents. The king-size bed was made with crisp white bed sheets. A fluffy beige carpet scratched at my black dressing shoes. In front of the bed was a wooden cabinet that stretched along the wall. A huge round mirror behind that. To the right was a grand window overlooking the quiet street outside, and a complimentary bathroom to my left. The search began. As I'd learned over the years, you weren't likely to find clues in obvious places. Obviously. After a quick sift through the drawers in the closet, sorting through shirts and sweaters, socks and panties, my attention turned to the left side of the room. Nothing was in the shoes or behind the paintings. I felt the carpet with my hands, studying every inch and feeling nothing underneath the fluff. I was tempted to take the flat-screen television off the wall, but it was attached via thick metal bars, and after shining a small flashlight through the bottom, I noticed the bars were nailed to the wall. There was nothing in or behind it. This went on for a few minutes. Finding so much nothing made my skin crawl with anxiety. I hated not being able to do something, anything, that would set me to the right path. It was wasted time. I needed to be reading files or downloading phone logs or sitting in a car with binoculars glued to my eyes to feel like I was getting somewhere. Searching a stranger's bedroom with no idea what I was looking for was upsetting, to say the least. I rested my hands on my hips and expelled a lungful of air, throwing my head back in frustration. The ceiling was flat, completely bare aside from the beige ceiling fan. It was currently off, strangely covered in a gray film, even though the motion of the blades while on would clear most of the dust off. The ceiling fan downstairs was running when I arrived, spinning hypnotically above Emmett's family. Surely they'd turned this one on as well. I must have been seeing things. I rubbed my eyes with my thumb and forefinger. You need glasses, Will. I decided to get the bathroom out of the way. The cabinets holding nothing but toothpaste, toothbrushes, and pill bottles. There was nothing under the bed except a lonely spider. The pillowcases were empty, and nothing was hiding in between the blankets. The nightstand to the left of the bed held a lamp, a framed photo of Emmett and his fiancée, glasses and car keys. Nothing helpful. The top drawer held more clothing items, these meant for sleeping. I sighed as I reached the bottom of the drawer, the last remaining place I could find something. But it didn't move. As I pulled on the handle, I realized that it must have been locked. A quiet click could be heard each time I tried to open it. I studied the drawer for a moment until I saw it. A small keyhole near the bottom right of the nightstand. It was a golden circle with triangles engraved in the metal, and in the center was another triangle, this one for the key. I hesitated, wondering if asking for the key would be the right thing to do. It might be locked for a reason, but I needed to see what was inside. I was on a job, after all, one that could potentially save a life. I stood up and looked around the room. None of the places I'd already searched held a key. None of the keys on the key ring sitting near the lamp matched the keyhole. I was debating on asking about it when it dawned on me. I quickly jumped on the bed, crumpling the white bedsheets in the process, and stood on the edge of the mattress. As I reached over my head, I realized how smart, or obvious, Emmett had been. I hadn't been seeing things. The ceiling fan was covered in dust because it was never turned on. As my fingers slid along one of the fan blades, acquiring a gray layer of dust along the way, they ran into an out-of-place bump on a smooth surface. It was a golden key, perfectly crafted into a triangle. I blew on it, sending tiny particles flying into the air, and kneeled near the nightstand. It fit easily into the keyhole, and I turned it to the left. A satisfying click echoed in response, and the drawer jutted out just an inch. My fingers slowly wrapped around the brass handle and opened it. Sitting at the bottom, exceptionally clean and shiny, was a laptop. I could make out my reflection on the sleek black surface, dotted and smudged with oils and from fingerprints. It looked like it had been used, and recently. Maybe it wasn't Elliot's. It could easily be his fiance's, and I could very well be intruding on her privacy. But before I could question my morals, the sound of tires on gravel emanated from outside and cut me short. In a swift battle, the little devil on my shoulder won, and I quickly grabbed the laptop and put it into my bag. I ran down the stairs and told Emmett's family I'd be in contact with them. They gave me half-hearted thank yous, and I slid out the back door just as the policeman entered. Back in my loft, I set the laptop on my desk and made myself a warm cup of coffee. I anticipated it was going to be a long night. I took a sip from my mug as I leaned on the kitchen counter and let the hot fluid settle in my stomach, welcoming the heat that radiated through me. On the drive back, the dark storm clouds that had been threatening overhead unleashed their downpour. Sheets of rain fell from the sky. My expensive coat had gotten soaked, despite my best attempts at using a book to shield myself. I laughed as I caught sight of my reflection on the way in, realizing the book I'd grabbed was a paperback. I took another sip of coffee. Lightning flashed outside my window, followed by a deep, low rumble of thunder 3 seconds later. The steady drum of the rain on the rooftop throbbed in my ears. My digital clock displayed 1:07 a.m. in bright red letters, next to the massive window overlooking the city skyline. Currently it was dark, ripples of water flowing downward, blurring the view. I wouldn't be looking out much tonight. I'd be in front of that laptop, trying to unearth anything that would help me find Emmett Thompson. My mug was half empty by the time I finally sat in front of my desk. I set it to the side and studied the laptop. A Dell, not a new one. Despite the shine on it, the sleek surface had multiple scratches engraved into it, and it definitely made it onto some of Emmett's travels. Grooves and rough indents covered the sides. The bottom had seen the worst of the wear. Deep gouges and crater-like holes riddled the battery cover. I hoped it still worked. The question was answered immediately. A small white light, positioned near a USB port, blinked steadily at me and was in sleep mode. I slowly lifted the screen and nearly jumped out of my seat. A yellowed page that had been stuck to the screen fluttered to the floor, scaring me in the process. I half laughed, half cursed myself for being such a wimp as I reached down to lift it from the floor. The white light of the laptop screen as it turned on washed over me, and I held the page to it, remembering that the heavy rain had cut the power. It appeared to be an entry of some sort, the left side clearly being the side it was torn from. The top right held a date. Messy writing filled the worn page, and I rubbed the touchpad on the laptop to turn it on again after it set itself back to sleep mode. I read, April 18th, 2016, 4:37 p.m. My team and I are packed and heading back after an amazing time here. The Sahara is as beautiful as it is desolate. Many days and nights were spent filming life here, and I have confidence it will portray the mysteries the Sahara holds in a unique, if never before seen, fashion. We have dozens of close-ups of birds and the plant life. To our bewilderment, over the course of 4 months, we have yet to spot a single snake, rodent, or insect. It's as if they've all vanished into thin air. We've spent weeks on end lifting rocks, looking under boulders, climbing branches, even going as far as exploring small caves, but no one has found a single trace that those animals ever lived here. It's quite the phenomenon. Barbara, our biologist, found a spider in her boot yesterday, but released it back into the wild before I could get to it. I spent a few minutes walking around our base to see if I could spot it, but it was a lost cause. We agreed that it was the first time since we arrived that we'd seen any animal on the ground, even the dead trees, which are usually writhing with grubs or bone dry. On a lighter subject, Michael, the boom operator, had a bird poop on him during a shoot. He took it like a champ, staying quiet until we finished covering a section on cacti and then running back to our tents to wash himself. I couldn't stop laughing. He'd been whining for days that he wanted to get more intimate with the wildlife. Well, Michael, you got your wish. I took another sip of my coffee, rubbed the touchpad on the laptop, and flipped the torn page in my hands. April 18th, 2016, 2:57 a.m. Jared, our second cameraman, just rushed into my tent, sweating and out of breath. He scared the living hell out of me when he stumbled in like a goddamn freak. I was still waking up when he unleashed a flurry of words at me, and I had to calm him down before he made any sense. Apparently, he'd woken up to take a piss. Following our rules, if you could call them that, he walked 50 feet away from camp to use the restroom. As he was doing his business, he said he heard what sounded like a quiet whinny, unusually close to him. He was curious, to say the least, considering we'd just spent 4 months in the Sahara without seeing anything that wasn't vegetative or avian. He followed the sound and came across what looked like a pool of quicksand behind a cluster of orange rocks. Smacked right in the middle of the quicksand was a damn camel, trapped in a futile fight for its life. He ran all the way back to tell me and is informing Barbara and Michael as I write this. We're heading there tomorrow. I hope the live stream program on my laptop back home captures this. All of our cameras are packed and I only have my phone to record with. Here's to the camel. Hope you make this trip more interesting, buddy. The writing stopped there. But while the rough page was held between my fingertips, a nagging sensation I'd had since I opened the laptop finally revealed itself, and it was how in the hell was I reading a torn paper in the first place? If this was written while Emmett was on his expedition, and his laptop had been sitting in a drawer in his bedroom, how did it get there? I was tossing the question over and over in my head when the laptop beeped. I jumped for a second time, hit my knee on the desk, almost sending my mug flying across the room. I cursed myself again and checked the laptop screen as I rubbed my knee. It had unlocked itself, displaying the empty desktop with a single window open in the center. It was a movie player, and in the center of the frame, which displayed rolling dunes of sand, was a play button. Confused and intrigued, I clicked it. The camera bobbed up and down as the person holding it ran. I could hear their ragged breaths and the rustle of equipment as it bounced along with the running. A strong breeze blew, and a deep orange bled into the surroundings, announcing that night was not far away. Every second, a leg would come into view, dressed in khakis and black boots. At the moment, the camera was pointed at the ground, flying over the yellow sand. It went on like this for a few more seconds, and finally the person stopped running and pointed the camera upward. It was then that I realized the camera was actually a phone. My mind went to the entry. All of our cameras are packed, and I only have my phone to record with. Once the phone focused, the walking resumed. We were now on a flat, dry piece of land. The ground was brittle and cracked, and a few dead shrubs littered the area. I was right about the time. The sun was beginning to set, and light was leaving fast. A clump of orange boulders was about 30 feet away from the cameraman, and I assumed that's where he was headed. Each heavy breath expelled by them made the microphone pop, and the sudden shout was even worse.
Jared, is it still there?
The gravelly voice died quickly in the vast environment.
Yeah, right here, Emmett.
Jared answered back, seemingly behind the rocks. Emmett quickly made his way there, and as he rounded the boulder, I saw exactly what the entry described. A pool of quicksand roughly 40 feet in diameter was hidden in the shadow cast by the rocks. Extending far beyond the quicksand were miles of flat land with no trees or plants in sight. Laying carefully on the wet ground were wooden planks, leading to a young camel that stood lazily in the center of the sinking sand. On the planks stood a man in his mid-20s with brown hair and square glasses. A sharp nose and a small mouth, tan skin. His arms were extended away from his body in an attempt to keep his balance as he slowly crept over to the camel. He flashed the camera a smile and a thumbs up as Emmett neared the spot, zooming in for a moment on the animal.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
Emmett began in a commentator's voice.
The first sighting of mammalian life in our 4 months here. Relish it, for we probably won't see another warm or cold-blooded.
As the man on the planks neared the camel, a woman spoke.
Jared, take this rope and tie it around his neck. It'll make bringing him out of there a whole lot easier.
The camera panned to the right, showing a brunette in her 30s with shorts and a shirt tied at the belly button. A thick rope was coiled around her arm, which she handed to the man next to her. I guessed he was Michael, with curly black hair and a beard, dressed just like Jared. Khakis, a blue t-shirt, and a beige vest. "Toss it here," Jared said, turning around to face them. Michael spun the rope in a circle a few times and threw it. It missed. It caught a gust of wind and flew to the right of Jared, who in turn extended his arm to try and catch it. As he did so, his foot came off the wooden planks by just an inch, but it was enough that it threw him off balance. Jared's arms flailed wildly in the air as he tried to regain his composure, but it was futile. Barbara's gasp and Emmett's shout rang in the air, and Jared fell stomach first onto the quicksand.
Shit.
Emmett repeated into the camera, getting as close as he could to the quicksand. Jared's voice could be heard pleading for help as Emmett placed the phone face up on the ground. The sky was now a pink that went black for a second as Emmett jumped over the phone and ran in the direction of Barbara and Michael.
"Jared, don't move. You'll sink faster. Stay still, okay?"
Barbara's shrill voice said. A backpack could be heard unzipping, followed by Emmett's voice.
"Try and grab the planks. Spread your weight. Damn it.
The camera was picked up again. Now I could clearly see Jared, up to his chest in the murderous sand. His arms were above the sand, but they would do him no good. As he had fallen, he hadn't realized the reach for the rope had actually landed him too far away from the planks to be able to reach them without sinking completely in the process. Emmett told Barbara to search her backpack for anything that could help, but before he could tell Michael to do the same, Michael removed his vest and threw it to the ground. "Fuck it," he said, taking his shoes off next. A hand appeared in the frame as Emmett tried to stop Michael, but it was rough and pushed away. "I'm not letting him die, man. He's like a brother to me." Michael took off, jumped onto the wooden planks that floated in the quicksand. He quickly made his way to the middle of the pool and kneeled on the last plank, stretching his arm out for Jared to grab. Emmett could be heard whispering, "Come on," over and over. Barbara had stopped searching through the backpack to look. Even the camel seemed to be interested in what was going on, shaking its head and trying to free its legs from the quicksand. But as Jared's hand closed over Michael's, the camel let out a sharp cry and violently swung its head from side to side, almost as if it was afraid. And then I saw it, just as Barbara's scream pierced the audio. The center of the pool, exactly where Jared was beginning to sink. The circle of quicksand was caving in on itself, forming a hole in the middle that was growing in size. The camel let out another cry, this one louder than the last. Emmett shouted a warning. Michael froze. Jared's eyes opened wide in disbelief as he stared at the sand surrounding him, and then the ground disappeared. It collapsed, the center of the pool vanishing into a pitch-black hole, along with Jared, Michael, and the camel. The outer area of the circle followed, waves of sand flowing freely into the earth. The hole began to grow even more, causing a ripple effect that pulled in more of the area even after all the quicksand was gone. It was almost like a vacuum. It was hungrily sucking in the environment with no end in sight. Emmett must have realized this as well, because he finally broke away from the initial shock and screamed at Barbara to get up and run. But just as she began to stand, the ground beneath her cracked and broke apart, causing her to lose her footing and trip. Her lower body now dangled below the sand, threatening to pull her down as well. She shouted for Emmett to help, and Emmett reached out his hand and began to pull her up. Loud booms and cracks could be heard in the background as the earth tore itself apart. An ear-splitting crash suddenly echoed right behind the camera, and Emmett quickly turned in time to see the boulders near them be swallowed up by the sand. He then spun the camera in a complete circle around him and came to the realization the piece of land he was standing on was surrounded by enormous holes and craters, but it was short-lived. And the moment he turned back around to continue helping Barbara, the ground under him rippled and fell. The video stopped just as Emmett's scream began, and the camera showed the sky getting smaller and smaller. A circular arrow appeared on the screen, advertising that I could replay the video if I wished to do so, but I couldn't. I was dumbfounded. Still not fully understanding what had occurred on the footage, I sat back in my chair and stared at the thumbnail of sand dunes, replaying the moment when the quicksand first began to sink, What exactly did that entail? Was the ground under the Sahara hollow? I wasn't sure if that was the right word to describe it, but then again I wasn't sure if I could describe anything I had just watched. I stared blankly at the screen for a few minutes before I noticed it. It was another window, this one minimized and only visible on the taskbar. It was a second movie player, and I curiously opened it. It was a photo. At least, that's what I thought at first. Then I reminded myself that it was a movie player window, so it meant I must be watching something, but nothing moved. The square window displayed darkness. It was underground somewhere. The dirt walls and ceilings were rough and ragged. Stone stalactites hung menacingly from the top of the frame, but what stood out were the carcasses. Dozens of dead animals lay on the ground. Rats, snakes, sheep, gazelles, foxes, what I thought looked like hyenas, and a camel. And that was when I noticed it. It was small, not easily seen, but important enough that it changed everything. At the top right, next to a blinking red circle, was a single word written in bold letters. Live.
Stories from Dark Places was recorded before an imaginary studio audience. All stories performed on this podcast have express written consent from the original author. Jonas Armitage, his studio manager, and the entire staff of WZHP Radio Innsmouth are fictitious characters, and it's probably for the best that you continue to believe that.